I guess this is not your first time working on an assignment like this. Was what you discovered in Nigeria different from the other parts of the world where you had worked?
I think it was. It was quite a challenging mission, especially because of the complexities when it comes to minority issues in Nigeria. First of all, it's different to determine who are the minorities, because every group in one way or another could almost claim minority status. So first we had to come up with a terminology, and of course what helps us is that we don't only look at the federal level, but we look at the state and the local levels, where these local dimensions of majority, minority, dominance, non-dominance plays out in a much clearer way.
What did you find out? Which areas of tension did you find out? And what are your recommendations likely to be?
I think our main finding was the very fact that people would not really care about minority relations, who is affiliated to which ethnic or religious groups, as long as they feel that people who are in power of decision making caters to their needs. So what we found that in localities where there is good governance and where there is a good political leadership, where people put their trust in the leaders, there are no problems that would arise because of minority rights from a minority rights context. And there are much less fractions in the communities and much less challenges. But where we see partisan politics favoring one group over another, and when there is a corruption, and when we see that there is a lack of access to resources or inequality of resources, this is when people start talking about ethnic and religious divides. So what we feel that naturally the common people of Nigeria would never really hate one another just because of differences in religion, ethnicity, or language. They start having distrust and lack of confidence in each other when there is a manipulation coming very often from political leaders. So when we went to local communities, they really wouldn't care about, they live very nicely together, the Muslims, the Christians, the different tribes and ethnicities. So they wouldn't really care about these differences. But the problem is that many times they feel that there are leaders who only favor one group compared to another one, and this is when they start having this feeling of differences and divisions within their communities.
You talked about the impediment of lack of data in Nigeria. Besides impeding your work, you also said it could affect development in the country. What would you suggest?
Well, definitely I would suggest the collection and analyzing of disaggregated data. So what I would really suggest the Nigerian government to start doing is to have an assessment on the composition of its population, not only on the federal level, but on the state and the local level. Because when I talk about minority rights protection, of course I talk about the protection of non-dominant group. Now, in order to know who are the non-dominant and the dominant groups, you need to know how they do, whether they are represented in the political levels in the country or even in the towns, whether they have access to economic resources, whether their cultural rights are preserved, whether their languages are preserved. But you can only see this if you have data about who are the people and whether they are in a marginalized or in a non-marginalized dominant position. But without this data, there is a lot of speculation. People feel vulnerable. They feel that they are less in number, they are less in positions, they are less in economic resources. But because of the lack of data, you can never prove it. And the problem is that it leads to this fear, and it leads to really just a lack of trust in each other. And I think it fuels the tensions, because we can't prove by data whether the groups who feel vulnerable are actually really vulnerable.
When you visit a country to carry out your investigations, you come with suggestions that could make it better in the treatment as it concerns the minorities. If governments don't take your advice, how can the UN get them to adhere to some of the suggestions you may have raised? Are there sanctions? Are there specific pressure on such governments to implement some of the suggestions of the independent investigator?
I think that the fact that I came here already shows that we felt that the UN should really look into these issues, because we felt that maybe there is not much attention given to minority tensions, minority rights, minority issues in general in the country. So the reason why I came is because of that I felt that we need to have an assessment on what's going on at the moment with minority rights protection. But you said it right. There must be more done. It can't just be a report. Now, in terms of sanctions, we have limitations. The UN cannot do sanctions. But what we can do, and as you rightly said, is actually pressure. Put political and other pressure on the government to try to implement the recommendations that I will be making in the course of the coming months. What I hope, and this is also my humble request to the communities in Nigeria, NGOs and media, to follow my report, to make it public, to help me spreading it to the communities. So now it becomes really a report that goes from the UN side, from an independent expert, to improve the minority situation in Nigeria, and doesn't only come from very often very neglected or abandoned groups.
You've been to a lot of places in Nigeria. Maybe one could still say that 2 weeks won't be enough for you to do all the work that you need to do. And I know you're still working on your report. There are a lot of things that's going to come in before you come out with a report. But what you have seen in Nigeria, do you think that the minorities are being taken care of? Their fears, their worries, their concerns? I mean, if you have to score in terms of percentage, what would it be?
First of all, Nigeria has to start really valuing the diversity. It should revert to the motto of unity in diversity. It should be seen as an asset, not as a danger, not as a challenge on the nation. And as your constitution rightly said, and it really has guarantees that people should feel belonging, they should feel unity, they should feel equal with each other. But I think that at the moment there is not enough attention really to diversity and equal participation in social, economic or political affairs in the country. So what I would encourage is the commissions and the federal government, and then also the state and local governments, to look at that guarantees that every group has a say in what's going on in this country. And as I mentioned also in my statement, I do hope that the forthcoming national conference will be a platform that can really push for that. I am calling for an equal representation of communities, not only the dominant groups from each state. I'm calling for the representation of various stakeholders so that people can come and really openly and honestly talk about their issues and their problems. But I also call for action to be taken afterwards. As I say, the national conference must not be a talking shop. It must come with very clear objectives and outcomes, and it must ensure that people who lost their trust in political leadership can actually regain that trust and place it again into the political leadership of the country, because at the moment I'm very concerned about how it is weakened and how people just turn away from politics because they are giving up on that.
Will a report like yours attract support from an organization like the United Nations to help the minorities in the agitation? Could a report like yours bring more assistance to some of these minorities? Because every day we've had cases where minorities had to go to the international court and all that. Could it attract some support from the outside for such agitations?
I really hope so. One of my roles, as I see it, is really to give voice to the voiceless, to go to communities who would be otherwise not be heard at an international level at the UN Human Rights Council. So one of my key roles, I think, is to go to these communities, listen to them, and then echo their views, their wishes, their concerns in my report, so that it doesn't only become the opinion of one marginalized community, but it becomes a concern of a UN expert looking at minority issues objectively in all the UN member states. So this is why I do hope that my report will be taken on board when these issues are discussed in Nigeria, and there will be an ownership of my report. I really wish that this doesn't just become my own report, but it becomes the report of all those who are trying to improve the situation of minorities, being them minorities or non-minorities, sometimes just sympathizers to the cause.
Well, you have the competence to sift through the various reports you get, because I know in your travels, in your conversations, in your one-on-ones, you had diverse people coming with diverse accusations, ideas, and all that. Since this is what you do always, in your interaction with the Federal Character Commission, or interaction with the National Human Rights Commission, with government officials, did you see any sincerity? Could you sieve through all that and see some sincerity in their commitment to minority issues?
I think I had very good discussions, and I was really much impressed by the depth of discussions we had. It's important to say here that I was really reaching out to all kinds of communities. From state and federal and local level politicians, I did go to a lot of NGOs. I visited traditional chiefs and rulers in many communities. I discussed with religious leaders, Muslim, Christian, women and men as well. And I also went for an IDP, to an IDP camp example, and then I met the highest level representation of all these religious groups, for example. So, as you rightly said, many times you hear controversial narratives of the same things. You talk to one community, maybe if it's a violent situation or intercommunal conflict, you hear one story from one group, you hear another story from the other group. As you said, it's my job to try to find the middle golden narrative, the objectives, and to really be placed on facts. But I also see my role in somehow, as a mediator, when we heard these sometimes very difficult and clashing views, I do hope that I can play a role in trying to bring these communities together and share their viewpoints, but sometimes they wouldn't share with each other because of the lack of trust. And I can tell you with honesty that we had very good meetings, very in-depth meetings, but I have to say that many times the people who make the change are really on a very grassroots levels. It's a young woman who in Bauchi educates 360 students on peace. It's a woman who is a Christian church leader and a Muslim woman who partnered in Jos to come together and try to stop the young boys going into violence, providing them with all the tools they need, rehabilitating schools. So many times it's the common man, the common woman who actually makes changes. And we talk about conflict prevention and it takes money and security, but what we heard that sometimes very little initiative, just a small attention to people, to young men, young women who seem to be lost, they don't find their place, just a very small attention to them can actually really feel them part of a team, part of the nation, and then they really reduce their urge to go and commit violence against each other. So I do want to give credit to those people who fight on an everyday basis against the common enemy, the evil that we are witnessing, unfortunately, in many places.
Though the government invited you to come to Nigeria to carry out this assignment, a lot of people are really worried if you had unhindered access to subjects, to situation, to people, for you to come out with a very objective report. Did you have any inhibitions in doing this job?
Oh, I can tell you very confidently that we didn't have any problems with that. When we needed, we had our government partners with us. When we didn't need them, we could just really release them and go without them. I'm very careful with that. If I go to communities, I always go alone with my colleagues from the UN. We never go with the government partners, exactly to encourage this honest discussion. And it happened many times with independent commissions where we just asked our government colleagues to, please, if you excuse us, we would really like to have a closed meeting. And I think this is exactly the method that helped us gathering a lot of very candid information where people could talk very freely. And I must also tell you that even in ministry, sometimes I was very much impressed by the honest discussions we had when people just really talk their mind. And sometimes they said, I can't tell you this in my official capacity, but I'm very ready to share my personal views with you. So I think I was in general very impressed by the depth of the discussions, and I feel that we really managed to get the most out of these meetings.
Do you think that Nigerians generally are enlightened about their rights as individuals in your interaction?
I think that Nigerians are very vocal when it comes to point out the problems and challenges. But I think where there should be more effort is really to have awareness raising on laws. You know, people always say that they are not sure, that they feel that they are excluded or discriminated, but many times they don't know that there is a legal guarantee that would ensure their equal participation or their equal running for elections. And then they don't go to courts because the courts, it means a lot of fee paying and they can't afford it. So I think that the Nigerians should benefit more from legal awareness raising, which should be carried out by various actors. But I'm not worried about Nigerians speaking out their mind. I'm rather worried about holding the officials accountable and questioning authority, because I feel that Nigerians are very open in discussing the problems, but when it comes to go to your leader and question your leader, this is when sometimes we have a problem.
Well, finally, in 2 weeks you covered a lot of ground in Nigeria, and besides asking questions about minorities, I guess you saw the other side of Nigeria. What's your impression of Nigeria? Is it anything different from what you read in the papers, what you saw on TV? What is your personal impression of Nigeria as a country?
Well, I have been before. I have certain ties to Nigeria, so I didn't hold the general opinion based on media, but I had actually already personal relationships with Nigerians. So my opinion about Nigeria in that sense has not changed, because I always thought differently what the media pours on us. And I'm very happy to say that the average Nigerian is peace-loving, and the people just really want this country to be together, to progress together. And what I find is that, and discouragement, which sometimes comes from very often political leadership, but I do hope that Nigeria, as I say, has a very bright future. There are certain things that must be fixed. For example, this equal representation and diversity for communities, so everybody feels to chip in and to contribute, so there is no exclusivity or who are the Nigerians, who hold the powers. But everybody can feel that if I succeed, if I learn, if I study, if I get practice, then I can be in any positions. And I do hope that my report will also bring up these positive experiences and practices, and will try to challenge the sometimes very biased reporting on Nigeria as a failed state, as a completely hopeless state where people just go against each other because this is what they like to do. So I do hope that when I bring up these positive practices and initiatives that I found about just average people trying to really foster unity, I hope that it can balance this picture and really give a truer picture of Nigeria and the Nigerians.
I'd like to thank you, Rita, for your time.
So